It's 8:06. As soon as we get live. It's 8. We're live.
Yep, we're good to go.
All right. So now 8:06, we'll call the meeting to order. We'll start with our mission statement. Lewis County Economic Development, through its board, the IDA, and its brand, Naturally Lewis, are championing the growth of a community where people want to live, work, build business, and play. We fostered forward thinking and relationship building, connecting people, businesses, partnerships, and resources to effectively and efficiently grow our county. I don't think we had any privilege of the floor today.
Nope.
So, we'll move into items for approval. First would be the minutes to the June 3rd regular board meeting. They were shared last week by Jenna. Did everyone have a chance to look things over? Any questions? We have a motion to approve. Darlene, a second.
Second.
Mackenzie, any discussion? All right, all in favor? Motion carries. All right, then we also had our annual meeting on June 3rd, following the regular board meeting. Those minutes were also shared, I believe. Any comments there, questions? Motion? Darlene, second. Awesome. Again. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. All right, May financial reports.
Your profit and losses first in your packet, and I'll try not to comment too much on year-end stuff because we can do that next month at our audit committee or our audit meeting. But couple notable lines: operating grant revenue or pilot payments pass through. I'm sorry, that's the Otis pilot being paid out actually instead of coming in May. Just the timing of that was a little bit off, but that will track just fine for year end. That line should zero out hypothetically, but we had a Lionsdale check that got lost, I guess, the closeout of the re-energy pilot. So that carried into this fiscal year. And so that's gonna not zero like I like it to see, but it wasn't like an overpayment or anything. It's just the timing was off. On the investment income line, Stu caught up on their payments. They do the trail behind a couple months and then send us a huge check deal. So that's why the investment income line is so high. And actually that's tracking much better for the end of the year than I expected with the deferments we issued for COVID. So that's a good point. Down under expenses, I see marketing. We did do a lot of year-end spending to use up that budget. On the bad debt loan forgiveness line, you see where we put the NRG delinquent lease on that line. So that's a big chunk.
That's the 21,858.
Yeah. And then we have negatives on the Trinity Ave expenses and agency expenses. The Trinity Ave expenses, that was again skewed, paying up a portion of their invoice goes towards taxes for that property and sewer and water. So when they pay it up, it becomes negative, but it should zero out throughout the year. Agency expenses was a credit we had on our books from FDRLO, and that didn't need to be a credit. They overpaid us and they intended to overpay us. They don't expect us to do anything else for that. So we just removed that credit. Any questions on the profit and loss this month? Let's move on to the balance sheet. This one, even less notable. It's looking really good. Accounts receivable is the only line I wanted to note. That It's just a snowmobile study payment that we did the upfront investment for that snowmobile study, and then we build out pieces of it to different entities. And that was just one remaining payment to be received, and it's now paid up. So our receivables are basically zero. We have nothing aging. And our other current liabilities are finally cleaned up. Any questions on that?
Thank you, Fran. There's no questions. Motion to approve. Second by Tom. Discussion. All in favor? Carries. All right, so now we're moving into two separate solar projects. That in the first one, so they're in the same township. They're on neighboring properties, but two separate projects. So we'll start with the Farney project.
Yeah, the Farney project, they're both 3 megawatt projects. Like Joe said, they're both on Brewery Road in the town of New Bremen, just different property owners. One actually goes over a line between Farney lumber property and a personal Farney owner, and the other one is on a zero owner property. If that narrows down the ownership for you. We ran our typical soil analysis with soil and water, and the Farney project came out at $4,884. The Zare project came out just over $5,100 something. We'll see that in a second. But basically they net 5,000, which is basically where we've been seeing everything fall. It's right around 5,000. Not really a ton to note on the cost benefit. They never show a benefit in terms of dollars because there's not local employment after construction. But this applicant has been very easy to work with. They've provided everything we've asked of them. They do have a few notes about using the local union halls for labor, so that's at least encouraging. Questions on them? I think you got the whole packet in your board packet.
Shannon, how are we determining the escalator every time still?
It's in our Utah.
Okay, that's just, and it's, so it's set at 2, and when does it change, ever?
Doesn't.
If ever, it doesn't.
2% for 25 years.
And based on what?
That's what we were seeing in different agreements throughout the state.
It's not tied to like inflation or anything, it's just.
No.
It was, I mean, it's been fairly standard to Cheyenne's point, and with different counties we looked at, and it's partially a planning tool for budgeting on both sides too. So, I mean, if we update our UTEP, it can be a point of discussion. That's when it wouldn't change in this agreement, but if we had a reason, a cause to change it when we update our UTEP, that would be the time to consider what we were, what made the most sense for us.
Joe, do you see around this, are you muted? Do you see around the state anything outside of the 2% escalator?
We see a variety, and thanks. I was actually going to comment on this, Brittany and Shai and the chair. We see a variety of numbers. I think 2% is really the going rate, if you will. But in terms of your question of why it's fixed, I think that's fairly typical also. You can certainly, obviously, as the chair indicated, you can revisit it as part of your policy. So that would affect projects on a going forward basis, not projects that you've closed and where you've entered into contracts with. I will add though, however, I have seen some people say, well, you know, I want it to be tied to actual inflation. And that actually adds a level of complexity to the computation of the pilot agreement and the pilot payment, because there's all sorts of different measures of inflation, different areas, different market batch, if you will, of items that are analyzed. So it does add a level of complexity to the annual computation of the pilot payment. So using a fixed number certainly makes it simple, is great for planning purposes, and avoids that, well, which index should we use, and are the documents clear enough as to which index we should be using? So that's really my comment on that, Brittany.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Other questions?
So today, what we're considering with these two pilot or incentive applications, because they are both looking for a sales tax exemption as well, is we would set a public hearing date. We were looking for a resolution to set a public hearing date and hold a public hearing to see what the community has to say about the projects, and then we would still have time to circle back and discuss it more before we grant these incentives. And also the secret resolution. So they've gone through the secret resolution with the town, or the secret process with the town in agreement with their citing already. And we just need to accept that.
Any questions? Comments?
With the planning board and agreement.
Yeah, they're all the way through their site plan process, and they've provided that to us.
Seekers all done.
Yep, and this is one that actually planning kind of gave us a heads up. Well, Cassie was very informed because she's at county planning, but also on the town and agreement board, so she gave us a heads up a while ago that this one was coming.
Right, well, if there's no other questions, then we first need we'll start with the Farney project. Or can we do together?
Separate.
Separate?
Yeah.
The Farney project, to set a public resolution, set a public hearing.
So move.
Tom, second. Darlene, discussion? All in favor?
And this is a roll call.
Oh, this has a roll call?
Yeah.
Sorry. Ron?
Aye.
Mackenzie?
Yes.
Dagan?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Darlene?
Yes.
Joe, yes. Jerry, excuse. We just roll call for the seeker as well.
Yep.
All right, so for the Clear Path Solar Farming project, motion to accept the seeker analysis done by New Bremen. Nancy, second. Darlene, discussion. Ron?
Aye.
Mackenzie?
Yes.
Dagan?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Darlene?
Yes.
Joe, yes. Jerry, excuse. All right, now moving on to the ZARE project, which again was included in the same analysis was included in the packet. All right, so we'll go to the public hearing resolution for the Clear Path Solar ZARE project.
I might just comment that we discussed both of these in the finance committee and agreed to move them forward. So I will make that.
Motion made by Tom,
Second.
second by Gagan. Ron?
Aye.
Mackenzie? Gagan?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Darlene? Joe, yes. Jerry excused. All right, now the secret resolution for the ZARE project. But motion to Mackenzie, second. Darlene. Discussion. Ron.
Aye.
Mackenzie.
Yes.
Hagan.
Yes.
Tom.
Yes,
Darlene.
Yes.
Joe, yes. Jerry excused.
All right, thank you. Joe, do you have anything else for us?
I actually do, Brittany. At the risk of extending your meetings or meeting, we've been with our IDA clients speaking very briefly about the most recent legislative session, and I've got 5 minutes if the board wants to hear what I have to say about the wrap up of the legislative session, and then I'll jump off and leave you all alone.
Yeah, if you guys are okay with that, that'll be very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, we're still, I mean, the dust is still settling on the legislative session. And we're still, because of that, we're still analyzing what really happened. But I think the headline that I've been putting on all this is it wasn't significant what did happen, it's significant what didn't happen. There were a lot of potential bills that were being considered by the Assembly and the Senate with respect to IDA operations. Many of them were very difficult in terms of the implications and the ramifications on IDAs. And in particular, there was one bill that gave significantly greater power to the ABO and in some respects duplicated existing regulations, and then significantly, in other cases, significantly increased other regulations on the IDAs. And the fact that did not pass, I think, is very significant. There were a couple of other provisions or potential bills that didn't pass. One that I thought was somewhat funny, I guess, is the way I would describe it. Although there's really not a lot of humor in the area of IDA work, is a provision that that restricted restricted the ability of elected officials to serve on IDAs. I thought that was intriguing because it was, I think, cynical, because the bill memo that went along with it talked about conflicts and potential for corruption. And if that's the view of the Assembly and the Senate, that you have duly elected officials locally being appointed to IDA boards and there is going to be a potential for corruption, it certainly is a cynical view on local operations and local government. What my experience has been over the years is that one of the criticisms of IDAs is lack of coordination and lack of communication between governmental bodies. And having an elected official on the board, at least in theory, should improve that. So I thought that was interesting. The other, and that obviously did not, or not obviously, that did not move forward. The other one that did not move forward that I had a particular problem with was the anti-pirating provision. One of the touchstones that we are always concerned about with respect to IDA projects is pirating by an IDA, moving a project from one part of the state to another part of the state. And there's provisions in the IDA statute which prohibit that. And the general rule is you can't move a project from one area of the state to another area of the state and extend IDA benefits to that project applicant. But there are, like most general provisions, there are exceptions. One exception is if the entity was going to move out of state. Well, if they're going to move out of state, you want to keep them in state, and accordingly offering them IDA benefits is a legitimate exception to that provision. The other exception is an exception that provides the authority to do that if the project applicant needs to make the move in order to improve its competitive position. And you need to have a finding by the IDA, you need to have a representation by the project applicant. And in our typical IDA application forms, we have questions relating to that, and we have questions relating to the competitive position issue. And the proposed legislation actually eliminated that exception. And again, trying to find some humor in these situations, only in New York State would you eliminate the ability for a company to benefit with IDA assistance in cases where the company wants to improve its competitive position in its industry. Again, a cynical, in my view, view by the legislature. We've actually litigated that situation. We had a very large project in the central New York region where a company was threatening to move out of state and also needed help because of a competitive problem. And we've actually litigated that. And as Brittany and Shai have heard from us repeatedly, the way to prevent those kind of lawsuits and or succeed in those kind of lawsuits is to document. And that's what we had done in that situation. And we won on a motion. The provisions that did, the bills that did receive approval by the Assembly and the Senate, I'll just talk about a couple of them. One was requiring all IDAs within a county to charge the same fees. In some counties, you don't have this situation in Lewis County, but in some counties, there are multiple IDAs, a county IDA, and then local town or city or village IDAs. And there was some competition and forum shopping by project applicants. And so this legislation requires all the fees to be the same. That's one piece of legislation that was approved. Another one extended the COVID loan and grant program for another year. And I thought that was interesting because that's a situation where the legislature identified a problem, these businesses having significant problems due to COVID and the related fallout from that. And IDAs were authorized to provide assistance in the form of loans or grants. And then the last one was a provision that prohibited an elected official from acting as a paid staff member of an IDA. And that again, you could make an argument that that's a cynical provision, but there was a situation in the Capital District involving a certain elected official that got a tremendous amount of press. And what we have found is that the Assembly and the Senate oftentimes react to newspaper articles and reports, and this got a tremendous amount of coverage. The last point I'll make, and again, this is kind of on the humorous bent, if you will, there was one provision that was introduced by a legislator down from the Long Island area, which actually expanded IDA powers. And that was notable, and I got a copy of the legislation early on for me to comment on it, because our bond counsel practice extends not just to IDAs, but through all sorts of governmental entities, including school districts. And what was interesting about this provision is that it authorized IDAs to issue bonds on behalf of city school districts. Now, I don't believe you have a city school district in Lewis County, but the problem that they were trying to address there was city school districts in New York State have a constitutional debt limit that is significantly differently computed than central school districts. Central school districts have a very expansive constitutional debt limit, and therefore when they do capital projects, it's very, very seldom that they are impacted by their constitutional debt limit. City school districts, on the other hand, have a very restrictive constitutional debt limit formula, and it impacts city school districts when they do capital projects. And there's a very involved process that city school district must follow in order to exceed its constitutional debt limit. Well, what I found funny here was this is a situation where a local legislator, state legislator, apparently reacting to some city school districts in her district, proposed legislation which would expand the purposes / powers of an IDA to issue bonds on behalf of a city school district in order to avoid that constitutional debt limit problem. And the reason I found it funny is that that particular legislator has in the past done a lot of, or spent a lot of time looking at and introducing legislation which restricts IDA powers and IDA authorizations. And it just goes to show that sometimes when you need some help, IDAs are there, and that's been our mantra for years, that IDAs are a very flexible, local, responsive entity, and they frankly should be supported and enhanced rather than, unfortunately, sometimes the subject of both governmental criticism and media criticism. And with that, Brittany, I'll pass it back to you. And obviously, if there's any comments or questions, I'm happy to address any of them.
Thanks, Joe. I know you guys have been really involved in the legislative session, and we've mentioned the New York State Economic Development Council that we are a member of. Hodge and Rest does a lot of work with that organization, and I'm on the board of that organization. And so the EDC is currently doing a lot of work, working with Camoin 310 to do an entire IDA study, like the impacts of IDAs, but they're not just entities that are providing tax breaks, they're doing economic development for their communities. So we're doing a lot of work as a state organization to present this information to our elected officials to tell our story, so that hopefully we, stop getting some of these elected officials throwing out crazy bills to try and restrict IDAs and what we can do. Joe, can you clarify, this is not really related, can you clarify with IDA board meetings now, just because we have Jerry that hopped on, he's a board member, but cannot be here in person, because the state of emergency has been closed, essentially. We now have to go back to in-person meetings. If we have a board member online, they cannot vote, correct?
Correct. I guess technically they could vote, and you could note in the minutes that they voted for or against a project, but their vote doesn't count officially.
Okay.
The rule is, and what happened about a week ago, and again, it was somewhat, looking backwards, it was humorous. It wasn't humorous at the time. The governor terminated all these executive orders that have been issued over the last 18 months, 16 months, and essentially made it effective the next day. And what that did was throw all the remote meeting schedules that we had in turmoil, because you had to go back to the old rules, and the old rules are in-person meetings. You can have a conference call or a Zoom call meeting that satisfies the local, the public officers law, if when you notice that meeting, you indicate where that remote location is going to be. So, speaking somewhat jokingly, if a board member wants to attend a meeting in his or her kitchen, as long as you notice or put in the notice that the public could also attend the meeting remotely in that kitchen, then that board member is a legitimately attending board member, and his or her vote can be counted, and his or her presence can be counted for purposes of the quorum requirements. But it's only if you make accommodation in the notice noting where that remote location is going to be, so that the public can have the same access as the board member.
Ron, we'll invite your base.
I'm sorry, that requirement or that restriction doesn't extend to staff and to consultants. So you can have staff and consultants attend remotely and get comments or what have you. So that's really the summary of what, of what the current law is, because what we've done is gone back, if you will, to prior law, which was affected by the executive orders.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Any questions for Joe?
Thank you for those updates. Very helpful.
Well, are very welcome. I had big shoes to fill, literally and figuratively, today with Mr. Canada. I'll give you his regrets, and you'll see him at your next meeting. And again, thanks for the opportunity to work with you all, and we'll be in touch as things move along. So have a nice day and happy first day of July.
Thanks, Joe. Have a good day.
Yeah, bye-bye.
All right. So we did, the next thing was the policy approvals. There's certain policies we try to update routinely.
Yep. So we've provided you all with 3 policies that we have reviewed in governance committee two months ago. The travel policy is a new policy that we haven't had, but it is required by the ABO. The uniform project evaluation policy we had, but we just added some evaluation criteria to that policy so that we have specific terms on how we evaluate projects as an IDA. And then the property disposal policy, there were no changes to that. We just need to review that on an annual basis. Anyone have questions about those policies?
It's like the property disposal policy. Just says it's.
Oh. Yeah, it's not coming up on mine either.
Might not share with us. Important.
And as Brittany said, these have all gone through the governance committee. We had just tabled them a little bit because of the annual meeting last month. Were there any questions or comments? Do we want individual motions for?
I think we can approve the slate, yeah.
All right, so would we have a motion to approve the new and updated policies of travel, uniform project evaluation, and property disposal? Charlie made the motion. Second. Ron, any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. All right, Snow Ridge.
I just want to note before Shai gets into this, so we have 2 applications for financing from Snow Ridge and Tug Hill Artisan Roasters. And I think we've noted before, we've seen an uptick in just local businesses and entrepreneurs who are in need of capital and financing. And we're finding that banks are not lending to small businesses as much as we would like them to, especially when it comes to hospitality and tourism related businesses. So, you know, one of the things that we've talked about over the past month is utilizing our services and our revolving loan funds and our regional partners and their revolving loan funds. That's going to be really important, I think, over the next year to allow these businesses to continue to grow. So I just wanted to note that. But we'll start with Snow Ridge Ski Resort.
Yes, and we talked a bit about Snow Ridge Ski Resort installment loan application or installment sale application at the finance committee. But the finance committee had some questions and some homework for me after that meeting. What they're asking for is that the IDA purchase $156,000 groomer for them and that they would pay for it and purchase it back from us in installments over the course of 10 years. They have a groomer. This would be kind of allow for that groomer to become their backup and allow for more consistent conditions at the ski hill. And I think it provided some additional narrative after the first run of narrative went out from Snow Ridge. They did just recently pay off their loans with, they had a $25,000 loan in the county fund and $25,000 in the USDA fund that they paid off this past year in the last few months. So it kind of frees them up from that pool of debt, and allows for, you know, a different path. There were a lot of questions from the committee on, you know, this is a seasonal business, very dependent on good weather. And Nick kind of addressed that in his narrative a little bit. They had a good winter this past winter, but he did note that it wasn't like outstanding. I mean, once we got snow, the snow stayed at least, but we didn't really get it until after Christmas. So they missed out on that Christmas week of sales, but they still feel like they're finally over the hump of, you know, buying a business and having to really dive into it. They've got upgrades they've made to that magic carpet they purchased. It has been a huge hit. I've heard lots of good things about that. They've made some improvements to their kind of facilities around the ski hill, and they've now upgraded or increased capacity in their campsites. So they've got that revenue stream going, and they're continuing to make upgrades in their different aspects that will allow them to become more of a venue for weddings and events like that. So I think all promising things. One thing we did want to look at is if they were to default on this loan, because they weren't consistent at paying month over month on their loans with us. So if they were to default on this agreement, could we go and sell that groomer and recoup enough of our investment? And due to the fact that this would be a 10-year agreement, and they're saying the expected lifetime of this piece of equipment would be 20 years. I ran just a very simple depreciation for 15 years, trying to be conservative. You've got it in your packet there. Against our 10-year obligation with them. And it did show that if we financed the whole $156,000, we would be ahead of the curve. And we'd be in first position on this. One of the things that kind of handcuffed us on doing too much about their delinquency from time to time on their loans was that we were in third position on those agreements. They had a landlord, and then they had Dink in front of us, and then us for financing for the property and the ski resort. On this piece of equipment, we'd be in first position. So if they ever got behind, and we could make a pretty strict agreement, if they're, 6 months behind, we take it instead of letting them get a year behind. We would be in a good position to resell it, and there's plenty of ski hills around. I think we would be okay to take on something like that. Does that satisfy the committee's questions?
In my mind, it does. That was one of our big questions at the finance committee, so I guess we've answered that. The finance committee basically was in agreement to go forward, assuming we got this answer.
Yeah, so I think a couple of the biggest questions that were remaining is usually we go 10 years and prime plus one, and that it's prime plus one assigning. But I don't expect prime to be moving too much right now. But they did put a 20% down payment to hold this piece of equipment, which equates to about $31,000. We did talk in committee about whether we allow them to recoup that and we actually do finance the whole thing. or if we require them to keep 10,000 down or 20,000 or whatever that number might be. And that's kind of why I ran it on kind of worst case scenario, this little analysis is to make sure that even if we finance the whole thing, we would be ahead of the game.
Do they want us to find this?
They would like us to, they'd like to keep that cash kind of fluid to do the other improvements they're looking to do.
Would that put us in a better position if we ended up taking it back?
If they had some money down on it, it would, I mean, that always helps.
Oh, yeah.
But
I mean, I'd be in favor of like the set amount of 10,000 versus a percentage thing. Because I do, again, to me, our job is to be supportive and certainly that extra cash would be, they have a lot of other stuff going on. But I do believe in having something down. I would throw that out there for discussion of that 10,000 numbers. Just because that's kind of what was discussed before. That essentially is about 21,000 of going back on what they already put as a down payment that they would then have for other improvements. And we know cash flow is definitely an issue especially in off season.
yeah, so that would mean finance 146,000.
A comment I would make is that they're listing that they're making improvements on their campsite. That's highly questionable. The town attorney has gotten numerous complaints about that, so.
Here's a question. Is that 156 the price of the equipment? Well, what about tax? It's gotta be a ridiculous amount of tax on it. Or is that including tax?
Would be tax exempt.
It would?
If we purchase it.
Yeah.
We purchase-
Oh,
Through
okay.
this, yeah, through this service, we would be tax exempt. Which is like one of the benefits to the
Right.
business, so,
That's pretty decent.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, in lieu of that, I don't think it's anything. I think it makes even more sense to have a $10,000.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Any other thoughts?
So if we can, I'd like the motion to read that the IDA would purchase the equipment for $146,000 over 10 years at prime plus 1%, allowing or requiring Snow Ridge to keep $10,000 of their down payment on it.
What about, do we need language in this regarding the delinquency, or would that be?
I think if the motion allows the executive director to sign this agreement, then
Or work with attorney on an agreement that
And a
includes,
standard security agreement. So we could probably say that will be a security agreement with them or something like that, you sort of have to the interest rate, you said prime plus.
prime plus 1 is our typical.
Won't be at least 4.5 in here, it's a good place, so like that.
Yeah, usually I think we've set it at closing. I mean, it would be fixed. It would be fixed, but it would be whatever that prime rate is at closing plus 1%. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Got this?
The time of the length of the amortization should be in the motion too, so it's gonna be over 10 years.
Yes.
If there's no other questions, we take a motion um, for the language Cheyenne provided. Then we'll make the motion. Nancy, thank you. Second. Darrell, second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Carries.
Cool, and we did talk about it a little bit at committee, but one of the things we identified in our strategic planning was wanting to support kind of recreational businesses, but also this does provide a little bit of a funding stream for the IDA because the interest coming back in is ours rather than with a loan. It goes right back into the loan fund, so it's a small revenue source.
All right, thank you. All right, Tug Hill Artisan Roasters.
All right, Tug Hill Artisan Roasters has applied for a $25,000 loan. This would be in support of them kind of moving forward with their old jail project. They are purchasing the old jail and doing a ton of renovation. They've got a grant that's helping them out with asbestos and lead abatement. And so basically they need to secure funding, upfront funding, in order to do the work to then be reimbursed by the grant. That's kind of phase one of their project. That also involves putting an elevator in the building, some roof work. What else are they doing there?
Asbestos removal. I think that was an asbestos elevator roof
For phase one.
and facade.
Oh yeah, I think they're taking the porch off in phase one as well, and kind of, then phase two will be more putting kind of a patio up front, and they're gonna make that space into, they're not only moving the roastery there, but moving Scott's wife, Vanessa, would move her bakery there. They have an artisan ice cream place out of Syracuse that wants to move in. They were looking for a bike shop to move in the cool eclectic downtown space with small spaces available for small businesses. This is not a rush application anymore. Scott has received financing he needs immediately, but he would like us to move forward with approving this anyway, in case there are overruns of costs and stuff. And so that way, if he does need to pull the trigger on it, we're that much closer to signing. But
So was this reviewed by the loan committee?
this was reviewed by the loan committee and we got positive feedback to move forward from them.
Yep. There were a couple members that were not in attendance, so those who are on the committee recommended that we reach out to them via email. And they were in favor of moving forward, and I will include those email responses in the minutes.
Yeah, one of the things I like about Tug Hill Roasters is that they are very debt adverse. They don't like to have debt. So if you look at their financing at all, like they'll carry a little bit of debt on a credit card for the month and then pay it off at the end of the month. They've got a zero balance on pretty much everything. And they've gone through the normal new business struggles of thinking the project is going to be like, they thought they'd be moving into the old jail in July. And they're over that hump of, oh, this is going to be a 2-year process. So I'm comfortable with where they're at as entrepreneurs. Any questions on their application?
They're remaining in the current location until they can go. There's no.
We have participated with Tug Hill Roasters with grant programs.
Mhm.
Just the grant, right? The CDBG grant so far. And just a side note, or not a side note, we need to include it in the motion. Even though we've fulfilled most of our obligation with the USDA for our loan funds, we still would require an underwriting by DANK to move forward with the signing of the loan. So we need the approval of the loan application to be contingent on a DANK underwriting.
Any questions?
So the question of why bank on this one, but because we're buying equipment was going to be another.
Because, yeah, the Snow Ridge application was installment sale as opposed to a loan fund. The loan funds just have their own set of rules attached to them.
And they're
Not our money,
technically not our
funds.
money.
Okay.
It was initially a grant provided by USDA to establish a revolving loan. So we,
Two different pots of money.
right,
Yeah,
Yeah.
the installment sale for all the weird obligations for all of our money, the installment sale is one thing that Brittany and I kind of talked about. It's very like open.
Right.
Buy things if we want.
so that's our money versus the revolving loan fund, it's just money we manage.
Mhm. And the last loan that we put out was Osceola Ski Resort 2.5 years ago. So it's been a while since we have issued a loan. And given that Snow Ridge just paid theirs off, Arbor Care loan, he's in very good shape. It's time that we lend out some money.
Yeah, if you know of any businesses needing funds, usually we cap them at $25,000, not to 2.5.
So we have a motion to, Darlene, second.
I'll say.
Dagen, second. Sorry, any discussion? All in favor?
I,
All right, motion carries, thank you.
Thank you.
Executive Director's report.
All right, some highlights from June that I just want to touch on quickly. Update on the daycare training boot camp that's happening currently through JCC that we funded in partnership with Jefferson County IDA. Currently have 19 students that are going through the program, which is more than what our goal was. Our goal was 15 between the two counties. And we were told that in Lewis County, on average, there's about 2 in-home daycares that open each year. So the fact that we have 9 Lewis County students going through the program, they've applied to get their license through New York State. They're going through the process. That's a great win for us. So we keep in touch with them and they keep us updated on the progress of the program. Our DBA Lewis County Entrepreneurship Program that we approved last month, we're still in the process of getting that ramped up. We're currently working on the contract between the IDA and the consultants. We'll have one last internal review and then we'll send it off to Kevin for review. And Jenna is working with an individual, a small business owner, as like a trial run, just to make sure that we have our process down. So we understand that there is urgency to get this up and running. We originally planned for fall to launch it, but we're thinking next month or this month, it's July. So we'll start marketing for that probably mid this month, right? Yep, mid-July. And lastly, I just want to touch on another project that we've been working on. I think, Joe, are you the only one on this board that was involved in the Commerce Park project? Was anyone else involved
Maybe
in the Commerce
I
Park?
remember a little bit of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, 4 or 5 years ago, the IDA was involved in trying to create the Lewis County Business Park, which was to be located next to the Climax building, next to the bowling alleys. Bernier and Carr, Mackenzie actually was a part of that project and was an engineer on that project. We have two local businesses, not confidential at this point. They're open about it. The Lowell Farmers Co-op and Casanova Equipment are looking for new locations. They want to consolidate, but also expand their businesses. The co-op has a lot of space issues where they're located now. And Casanova is also just looking for a new location in a new building. So we are working with both of those entities on trying to facilitate that sale between the landowner and those two businesses for a new location for them. And full disclosure, we did bring Bernier and Carr back into the mix to help us with fixing, or I guess revising the site plan based on Casanova and the co-op's needs. They're working on that right now. Because Mackenzie was a part of that project and now part of the board, our board, she's not involved in that project anymore. They've brought on another engineer, but we've asked that any conversations going forward, that she just recuse herself from those conversations. So their timeline is, 4 to 5 years out, but definitely a cool project. And if we can assist them in any way, that's what we plan to do. Any questions on my report? Thank you.
Thank you. It's good news. I mean, I think we've talked about, especially with agriculture, about the support structure we have here for, in the businesses related to farming. And so having two major ag-related businesses looking to reinvest in Lewis County is definitely positive. And I think if we can support that.
And there's always been rumors that Casanova was going to leave Lowville, and they were like, tell everyone that we don't plan on leaving, that they want to invest in this community. So.
Just to go along with what Joe just said, that's huge in selling farms. My business is quadrupled from what it was a year ago to now. A lot of it is to support.
Yep, right.
Yeah, there's areas of the state where a farmer has to drive 2 or 3 hours to an equipment dealership, or has to have, a veterinarian come in from 2 hours away. And so, the fact that we have the structure we have here, still have the, number of farms and number of cows to maintain that critical mass. I mean, that was part of our discussion around the solar and the prime farmland and maintaining that. So I think it's all positive.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so moving on. No other questions for Brittany? Correspondence?
All right, just want to share kind of two conflicts of interest that we have run into. The first one is a letter from Barclay Damon. There's an attorney from their Syracuse office who is currently representing Solitude Solar. And we received this letter from Melissa Bennett, who is an attorney in their Albany office. We currently have an open, that's what I'm looking for. Open contract with them, essentially. She helped us with updating all of our policies a year and a half ago. And that contract is essentially still open. We have not used Melissa for anything within the past, I don't know, year, I guess. But she just wanted to make us aware that we have that open engagement letter with Melissa, and also an attorney in their Syracuse office is representing Solitude Solar. So essentially we didn't see too much of a conflict because we haven't used Melissa in a long time, and I don't foresee us using her to help us with policies in the near future. So we acknowledged and signed this letter and sent that back to her. That was the first one. And then the second one is an email from Kevin's office. Kevin is representing us in the Lions sale, property sale. And Katie Harvey, who is a new attorney in Kevin's office, is representing Rez, the buyer of the property. And just wanted to make sure that we were in agreement that we both agreed that we were going to sell the property as is, no conflicts, no disagreements, and that we would move forward with that arrangement. And we felt that that was sufficient.
It's a ethical obligation. That in order for one firm to represent both sides of a real estate transaction, is there has to be disclosure to both sides. And Katie is disclosed to Rez or Nick Rez or whichever the buyer. And that she represents, and she's in the same firm that I am. And I have to disclose that to the IDA, to the board also. So disclosure is the first part, and then the other side of the disclosure is that if there is a conflict, something comes up and say there's an argument about price or how it's going to be paid or something like that, and it can't be resolved by the parties, then both attorneys have to get out. So if there's a conflict, we both have to. So ladies understand that, Mr. Meyer, I understand it. I just wanted to make sure you folks were aware of it as well. Also, if you object, you can say, no, we don't want you to do that. And either Katie or myself would have to buy it.
Any questions?
Yeah, anyone object to that?
All right, thank you. Committee reports, we kind of touched on some stuff as we went with Tom and the other.
I think we pretty much covered what finance did. Cheyenne covered it well and passed everything, so.
I did
Good.
want to circle back around. There was some discussion at Finance Committee about how our energy pilots have been structured in terms of if they upgraded the solar array and it's now a 4 megawatt array instead of a 3 megawatt array 5 years down the road or whatever, what our pilots language says around that. And so I did a little digging, and it's something that we can discuss more when we discuss maybe updating our UTEP or something like that. But it's been, we have a few different ways we've handled it. With the wind projects, it's been handled that they have to certify each year what their installed capacity is. So it's quite formal for a wind project that they're certifying each year what their capacity is, and therefore we can bill them based on their installed capacity. Our first two approved pilots would be Solitude Solar Denmark and Solitude Solar Turin. Denmark project since it's sold. They didn't really provide anything around that. We actually wrote them out such that it was a dollar amount per year for the pilot. It didn't really talk about the megawattage in any specifics at all. And then our most recent payment and move tax agreements for solar have had a little bit more meat around them. They definitely refer to the specific megawattage, but also they have just like a little clause that speaks to changes in installed capacity. So at committee, we said that we'd like to see that firmed up a little bit and a little more formal in terms of the reporting requirements on installed capacity. So we'll talk about that more when we talk about upgrading or updating our UTEP.
Which this in the next few months, not in July, but in the next few months we'll start those conversations. We'll be coming up on 1 year of when we updated it, and we've definitely learned from it, and we've uncovered some of these other considerations. So as we move into August, September timeframe, and we'll have more of those discussions, and be looking for some committee work on that. Guy, and anything else?
No, nothing more about hotel.
Thank you. Last part of the agenda is the Tug Hill study.
Yeah, so we provided you all with paper copies today and also sent electronically. I just wanted to go through and highlight just some of the results that came back from this study. This is the final version. Do you want to pull up the packet? Definitely a really good process. I think all of the partners were very satisfied with the results that came from it. Again, the intent of this survey initially, or the study initially, it was brought to our attention by the snowmobile clubs, was to really focus on, how can we communicate the impacts of the industry to our landowners and to our local stakeholders, including the state as well. So if we can go to page 3, just want to note that there were 2,416 surveys that were completed in the page 3. Yep. And respondents were from 789 unique zip codes. So of all the survey results that we got back, these are some of the zip codes of where they actually live and where they're coming from. And the way that the survey was analyzed is we surveyed, we had an electronic survey, JCC went out and did intercept surveys, and then we sent surveys out to the local snowmobile clubs within the 4 counties, but the actual economic analysis was performed on just the Tug Hill region. So the towns that are located within the Tug Hill. Next page 4. So they really were looking at finding the net new visitation and the net new spending, which is pretty much saying that they're looking at the people that are here specifically for snowmobiling. So they weren't really looking at the locals, they're looking at that net new spending and net new visitation. And that their primary reason that they're here on the Tug Hill is because of snowmobiling. Page 5. So we included a bunch of just different questions within the survey that would help, different entities kind of move forward in some of their work. I thought it was really interesting that the annual household income of respondents, 25% of them made over 150,000. So when they're here, these people they're coming here and they're spending money while they're here. Page 8. Thought it was also interesting that when they are planning a trip to the region, figuring out where they're getting their information, and the top 2 answers was social media and pretty much word of mouth with friends and family. So like state tourism info and websites, that's not really where they're finding their information. For such a prominent industry in our region, like word of mouth and social media, it's just crazy to me that they're not getting their information from formal websites, that it's just very much word of mouth.
And that confirms that our local clubs need to have experience or advice on managing social media.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Yeah. I mean,
and they'll get this, right?
Oh yeah. Yep. In the snowmobile clubs, their social media following is like thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So it's a good thought, social media training for them. We asked them on page 9, what is the one most important improvement that needs to be done to improve the snowmobile experience? Top 3 included improving trail maintenance, creating new trails and creating additional trail signage. And that goes to the next question on page 10. What's the one most important thing that would safeguard the snowmobile experience? And majority of the respondents said securing and expanding private landowner trail access by incentivizing landowners to open snowmobile trails. So I want to reiterate, this is like one of the big points that we wanted to hone in on. Landowners essentially receive nothing to open their land to trails. They don't receive any sort of incentive to do so. And the industry is essentially ran on volunteers. So the snowmobile clubs are all volunteers, and they're the ones who are grooming the trails at midnight, maintaining the trails, putting up trail signage. So I think this is one of the most important things that we need to focus on as a community moving forward, is figuring out how to incentivize landowners to open up their land, to provide more trail and riding opportunities. And how do we just make more investment for the industry and not have to rely so much on volunteers? I mean, the county does invest and provide funds to the clubs, but again, it's volunteers who are grooming the trails at midnight throughout the winter. So I thought that was really interesting. And then moving on to the economic impact. Lots of numbers in here, won't get into the nitty gritty, but they looked at the sales tax, property tax, and occupancy tax based on county. But they figured that the average spending per user per day is $192. And that shows that the total annual economic impact of snowmobile users in the region is about $81 million per year. So huge economic impacts to all of our counties. And I guess next steps with this study, we're working as a partner group to figure out, what's the best way to present this information to stakeholders, and how do we further get this information out. Thinking more towards the end of the summer, we'll do a lot of the push, because that's when we're starting to think about fall and winter. So if you guys have any thoughts or ideas on how to get this information out in a better way, we're open.
Will this be formally presented to the legislature?
Yes, I would like to, and was actually thinking, I don't know if maybe we include the other counties as well. Like, instead of all of us doing separate presentations to legislators, let's bring everyone together. That might have a bigger impact because it was a regional study. Yeah, right. It is a regional trail system, so why not figure out ways to work together more?
Involving those trail coordinators. Yeah, not necessarily the clubs, but those paid. I don't know if every county has. We have one, right?
We have Jackie Mahoney with Parks and Rec, but
Yeah.
she doesn't really.
She's not the trail
She's
coordinator.
she's more focused on the ATV system, because that is a county system. With snowmobiling, she's more of support. She's involved, but yeah, we don't really have like a trail coordinator for snowmobiling. So.
I think this is great for one, and thanks for all the work. But this is a little off target, but your comment about the volunteer system, I think, there's kind of two sides to that, right? And we see that in a lot of things in this county. It's one of the things that I think is kind of cool about the area and the community is the number of things like this that are supported by volunteers, and the effort that goes into that. But there's also kind of a tipping point where, frankly, there's volunteer organizations that are providing basically what should be, public services.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think, we see you know, there's a tug of war for sure, and I'm not advocating for all of this stuff to be paid positions and more organized, but I think as a whole, as a county, we should look a lot harder and wearing our economic development hats as we're contracted with the county, and our role here is to, and we, you know, in our strategic plan, we talked about placemaking and community, and economic development isn't just, you know, infrastructure for a factory or something, but it's building that support and that community that people want to move to for the jobs and stay here. And you know, I think this is something, whether it's snowmobiling or the current discussions with like the community center and double play and you know, all these different things there. We really have to take a harder look at all the stuff that goes on here, and quite frankly, how fragile a lot of it is, because there's never been support, and people have always just kind of made it happen. It's a cool thing, but it's also a very fragile system.
Yeah.
And I think this is another example of that, when you look at the dollars and the money and the impact here, and to think that you get a few people that retire from volunteering, and it could throw a whole section of the trails system into disarray, right?
Right.
So,
And if the volunteering, you know, is something that continues, and it will continue, we need to bring up the younger generation to get involved as
oh,
well.
I'm not advocating for moving away from the volunteers. We certainly couldn't afford as a community to fund all of this,
Right.
but I think there could be, I think we need to reevaluate the balance a little bit.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
acknowledge how fragile a lot of this is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so we're very happy with the study, and we'll continue to analyze and figure out the best way to tell the story to stakeholders in the community and landowners going forward. Any questions? So last thing, I just wanted to touch on my maternity leave. My tentative last day is going to be July 9th. And Cheyenne and Jenna and myself had a meeting this past week on just, you know, what are the projects to keep moving forward? What are things to kind of put on the back burner? And I think we're good going forward. And thankfully, we have Kaylee to help us this summer as well. As far as board meetings go, just bare minimum. We aren't going to focus too much on committees unless we absolutely have to have a committee meeting for the next few months. And some of the projects that we have ongoing, you know, like Lionsdale, we need to keep moving forward. Entrepreneurship program, keep moving forward. Some things with the Lions Falls Mill, we need to keep moving forward. So I think we're good there. So this will be my last meeting for a few months, and have all the confidence in the world of Cheyenne, Jenna, and Kaylee for her remainder of her time here. But yeah, just want to thank you guys for your support and the long maternity leave that we do get here at the IDA. A lot of people are very surprised that we get that amount of time. So thank you guys for your support in that. And if you need anything in the meantime, Cheyenne or Jenna are your main contacts. 2 weeks.
Yeah, sleeping.
Huh?
Get your sleep in.
Yeah, it's not really happening, unfortunately. But that's all we have.
Just a quick note before we adjourn. Our regular meeting in August will be the presentation of the audit. We should have an audit committee meeting before that. I think the last time we did it like directly before at like 7:30 a.m. before the 8 a.m. Meeting. So audit committee, if you want to start thinking about that, we'll just confirm via email.
Just Tom and
Just
Joe.
Tom, myself, I think.
Mhm. Don't worry, guys.
I see anything with numbers, I just. I just-
Yeah, start at 6 a.m.
And we recently bought a camera and we would like to get board photos of everyone for the website. So if you can come prepared for that next meeting, just take a quick headshot after. Send a reminder of the next meeting.
Come on, Joe. What's up?
Motion to adjourn. Ron, he was quick. Second. All in favor? Aye. All right.
Thanks for joining us today.
Do anything for